So, I want to turn this off again. So, Erin, if you don't mind, could you grab the research design and methods? And this is actually an easy one to go through. Probably the easiest of all sections for anyone with a science background. And then I'll give you a nice break, and then we'll end with the NIH system of peer review. Thank you. So why is the research design and methods sort of the one that comes most naturally to scientists? I think it's because people who do science tend to think about how you carry it out. So this tends to be a sort of straightforward section for many scientists to write. And that's kind of the good news. So that's also kind of the bad news. The bad news is that, when people are thinking about research design and methods, it can be so straightforward that people, there can be a tendency to write this section in the same way that you would write a cookbook. We're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and voila, it's going to turn out to be a cake. It isn't that that's the awfulest thing in this entire world that you can do in the research world. But here's what I want you to know about research design and methods. Here's what I want you to really remember. What really makes this section stand out, and what I think is so essential, more so for a new investigator than for someone who's established, what your reviewers are looking at here isn't just what you're proposing to do, but your ability to think critically, to have the judgment that no matter what happens in the course of carrying out this research, that you will get meaningful data. So how do you show your ability to think critically? Because that's what sets off the funded new investigator from the one who does not get funding. And that's what we're going to focus on for this half hour, research design methods. And again, we go verbatim with the NIH directions, which say, we want to know your research design, the conceptual or clinical framework, procedures, and analyses to accomplish your aims. What methods will you use to collect, analyze, and interpret your data? If you're coming in with a new methodology, what's its advantages over the current gold standard? Novel concepts, approaches, tools, technologies, and then a very confusing one. The NIH says we want to know the potential difficulties, limitations, and alternative approaches to carrying out your aims. You're thinking, wait a minute, potential difficulties, limitations. Why am I going to hand that over to my reviewers? Why am I going to tell them about all the difficulties that could arise when I'm carrying out this research? Because here's what the NIH is looking for. Again, and we're going to look at this one in a little bit, we'll look at these points in more detail, but the bottom line here, your reviewers are just like you. They're scientists. They know as well as you do that whatever it is you're proposing in research design and methods, no matter how clearly, articulately, and in great detail you present this section, it's science. It may or may not turn out the way you think it will. Stuff happens. You're working on human subjects. 1,000,002 things happen with human subjects. So things don't always turn out the way we think they will. And that's fine, because the same thing happens to their research. So they're not looking for a crystal ball. What they're looking for is, if they give you the money, if they agree to fund this research, will you be able to carry it out? Do you have the ability to think powerfully, in great detail, analytically, such that you can come up with an alternative approach to carrying out your research if you run into problems? That's what we're going to include in potential difficulties, and I'll show you how. We include a timeline, and again, for those of you who are going to apply within the next year, how many pages do we allocate to this section? The directions don't give us a page number, and you think, well, how in the world am I going to figure this out? Here's how you figure it out. The research plan currently is 25 pages maximum. We add up how many pages we use for our aims, background significance, and preliminary studies. Let's say you used up 12 pages. 12 from 25, you have up to 13 pages. And I should have said this earlier, for those of you who are working on a K award, average number of pages for preliminary studies, I said 6 to 8 for an R01. If you're looking at a K award, 4, 6 maximum. I think 6 would be an extraordinarily large number for a K award. I think 4 would be very, very credible. So how many pages do we have left? Again, this is going to change in 2010, but the fact that you have so many pages left over for research design and methods is a big heads up. What's the underlying message when the NIH gives you up to 12 pages, 13 pages to talk about research design and methods? Big heads up, err on the side of detail. Do you have to fill up every page? You know, if you have a 22-page application? No. If it's 18 pages for an R01, is that going to be thin? Absolutely. So, again, use your own judgment, but we know by the fact that they've allocated this number of pages, they are looking for detail. And I would go further than that. I think they're looking for far more detail from a new investigator than from an established investigator. You think, well, why would they do that? That's kind of miserable and mean. So here's why they do it. Let's say you're competing against Dr. Mao, since she's here, she's a funded investigator. And let's say Dr. Mao is doing 50 million things for a change of pace, and she's, you know, running a department and seeing patients and putting out grants and being a mentor. And you know what? She's putting in this R01 and she doesn't really have time to do it. And so her research design and methods is kind of thin. She came in with 8 pages. Oh, you know what? She sits on the study section up there. She reviews grants. She's had a long track record of receiving peer-reviewed funding for her research. She has lots of NIH grants under her belt, and she's published based on those grants. She didn't do the best job in the world on this research design and methods section. Do we think she's going to do a good job carrying out the research? You bet. Will she be held to a different standard than you? You bet. So it may seem kind of mean that a new investigator is going to be held to a different standard, but I absolutely think that that is true. As a new investigator, no one's going to give you the benefit of the doubt. They're not going to say, oh wow, based on this terrific training, I bet she'll be able to think of how to carry out this research. Err on the side of great detail. So the first point I want to make about research design and methods is how you conceptualize this section. First point, research design and methods is literally the description of how you'll carry out your aims. And even though these two pieces of the application aren't back to back, sometimes, and again, personal preference, sometimes it makes a lot of sense to do your aims and then turn to research design and methods and write them back to back, as opposed to the background significance and preliminary studies. Sometimes it's just easier to do that, because here are my aims, here's how I'll carry them out. So do what works for you. But here's the big point I want to make. Design and methods are two different animals. If a person forgets one of these animals when they're writing up their application, the one they forget about is design. Everyone remembers the methods, but these are two different things. And how important is this to the NIH? This is hugely important, because some years ago, again, I want to say 8 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it was, this section had a different heading. It was called experimental methods. So, experimental methods, and that was the whole heading. And this was a paper-driven universe. And the NIH went to enormous expense to not just change the name of the section, but to reprint every single NIH booklet, all the directions, everything, to reflect this change. So that tells us something. This was an expensive change. It tells us that design and methods really means something to the NIH. What's it mean? Design. Design is creative. It shows your thinking. You could have come up with 50 different ways to design this project, but you didn't come up with 50 different ways. You chose this particular design. It shows your thinking. It's interesting to read. It's much shorter than methods. Methods tends to be, it's the details of the procedure. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes it's quantitative, it's precise, it's often known to the reviewer. And just because it's known to the reviewer, it doesn't mean we're going to omit it. We're going to still include it in great detail. It's lengthy, it's detailed. It's not as interesting to read, but it's long. So, design and methods.